Okay, Akbar.
All right, Islam.
Islam.
All right, thank you for coming out. Okay, this is another production from Self-Improvement Learning Center. We have a special treat tonight. We got Brother Clay Bay, who's gonna. This is like our maiden voyage. So this is our first event here. We outgrew the Soul Brothers Cafe, and this is the first step, in our growth. And I want to thank everybody for coming out. We're gonna start. Raj, you ready? Raj,
yes, I'm ready.
we're gonna start. Okay, we're gonna get everything rolling right now. Okay, so just everybody get comfortable, and I want to bring on Sister Raj.
Alrighty.
Sheetrock.
This is it. You're the right place.
Sheetrock.
Islam, peace and love.
Islam.
Are we getting comfortable now? Again, this is our first time here, so when we came, this is how they had it set up. So we thought,
We're doing all right.
Are we doing all right? Because y'all do not want to miss any of this. You don't want to not be able to hear. You want to be able to hear it all as well. If you open up the doors back there, maybe you could stand back there. Next week, we're going to be in this room, not the one over there, and another room that's going to be across the lobby or across this gym. It's going to be a second classroom for orientation for people who are just coming into the information of their history and their heritage. Because a lot of times people come and we're doing advanced stuff and we're kicking about law and etc. and you're lost on it. So we're going to have an orientation. An orientation might end up being here. Let me by a show of hands, because see, the orientation is going to include astrology. Because in order man know thyself, in order for you to know yourself, you must have astrology. So that that's true spirituality. And I'm saying that, but once you find out what it is and do your own chart or have your own chart done and have understanding of it, you'll say the same thing. So we're going to also do astrology classes and teach from fundamentals and grow into that. How many, by a show of hands, wants to start? They won't start next week because we're going to be doing orientation, which orientation will be really every week because we're going to have 2 little areas over there. How many want to go into astrology classes? All the women, I know. All right, how many count how many that is? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Beginner.
I don't have my glasses on. Cause wait, 1, 2, 3, 6, 7. I don't want to point. 8, 9, 10, 11. Huh? You count? You can count.
Roughly 20.
Roughly 20 people want to do astrology. So that already tells me that the astrology class will have to be in here, and the law class might have to be over there. We're trying to figure it out what's going to be what. But either way, we are going to work it out. We're going to work it out. All right. Did you raise your hand for astrology class?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Oh, all right. The other thing is, as well, remember we created the Moorish civic service class, civic services, right? Yeah. Now, where's Nico? Oh, all right, and Cherokee. All right, Cherokee and Nico will be doing, and as well as Naru, who is not here right now, will be doing, that's considered the advanced classes, but these are services for those who need the services of writing, like I said before. It's simple. We'll give information away and, affidavits, etc., but everybody can't write that. So in doing that, you would check with the civic service to teach you how to, or if there is probably a small fee for their time, because somebody's got to do it, not me. Somebody's got to do it. Some people don't know how to do it, so they want somebody else to do it. So there's a small fee for writing letters that deal with your civic or law or court or things like that. So now you have an outlet for that through here. All right? And there will be classes taught. This book right here will be available next week. I told y'all about it last week. It's how to utilize the in lieu of W4. No, they're not available to anybody now. This is just an edit for Cherokee and Nico to go through. Because this will probably be the first thing that they're going to use. Next week's class is probably going to cover this. Utilize the in lieu of W4, how not to use a Social Security, and how to deny a court-appointed attorney. Those are real simple things. So this book will be available next week, and you really need to have it for This is the first thing most people want to do and need to do. So you begin to free yourself and free your mind. Because it's really in spirit. It's not just, oh, let me do that. You really have to have your spirit right to actually administer these. So I don't want to, without further ado, since we have been waiting and now we seem to be all situated and we got enough air flowing in here now, we are going to present what I told you that I saw at the Long Island University from Brother Clay Bay, which is, as I described it, I think I described it correctly, did I not? The truth about what happened in America after 1492, because you probably have not heard this truth at all. You've heard a lot of stuff, but you haven't really heard it. You won't be the same. If you haven't heard this, I guarantee you, you won't be the same when you leave this room tonight. That's what I'm talking about, if you haven't heard any of this information. So without further ado, Clay Bay.
Islam.
Okay.
I guess I could easier on the camera to stand or. Oh. All right. So short introduction of myself. The name is Claiborne Bay. This is my brother Marlon L. We study law and pretty much just the statute focus.
A little louder.
For the most part, it's the statute law, trying to understand, better understanding of the corporate body, if you will, trying to get a better understanding of how to maneuver commercially, maneuver through the statute situation and the mess that we're in now.
Can't hear you back
in this
here.
here and day.
You gotta speak a little louder.
Oh. Some of you are familiar with Sister Myra L. Some of you were out at LIU when we did the presentation on the class that she's offering now, just to, you know, give a little bit of a better understanding of how to deal with the Uniform Commercial Code, a better understanding of how to deal with civil and statute law entirely, pretty much. And what I do for the most part, as well as study with her, is take a pretty in-depth understanding of the history from what it is prior to this construed understanding that we've been given of the Moorish experience after the migrations from the Western Horn, from Togo, from Benin, as well as prior to it. There are a lot of misconceptions, a lot of misconstrued understandings of what exactly happened to the brown man and the brown woman as far as the experience in the Americas is concerned. So what I want to do today is go through a little bit of some detailed information with some reference, just to give you an inkling into who it is we were prior to this experience that they credited to us through slavery, and how intricately connected it is into the idea of the native life here, as well as government, as well as tradition. All right. So I guess we can just get started. Anybody here familiar with Ivan Van Sertima?
Yeah.
I know I'm among studied minds, I can feel that. Ivan Van Sertima wrote a book called The African Experience in Early America. And what you're seeing here is an Olmec head. It's basically an old sculpture that they found in South America, somewhere near Guyana, if I'm not mistaken, a little bit closer to Peru. Speak up. Sure. And what it is obviously evidence of the phenotype and the placement of brown people, Aboriginal people on this continent. And the beautiful thing about this relic here is that not only is it reference to who it is that we are and reference to our predominant existence on this continent, it's also predated to the Columbian experience, or the Columbus experience, if you will. Brown people on this continent have not only been here prior to the experience that they give you in history books accrediting Christopher Columbus, they've also been here for ages beyond even what they accredit to the pyramids of Giza and the Egyptian experience that they give you over in Maghreb in northern Africa. Okay, so we can move on from there. What you see here is obviously some of the trade routes. This is also some of the mappings that Van Sertima would give you in some of his books. And obviously, we all know that the Western Horn was where a majority of the slaves came through the ports to the Americas during the 13th and 14th centuries on, because the wars of Islam that were going on as the message of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was being spread, centralized all of the slaves to be brought to the Western Horn so that they could be exported into a slave system that we obviously have been given information towards through the history experience that we've been given in America. However, what they haven't given us inkling into is how large that empire and that global understanding of slavery was. Okay? In a republic, a slave is not only accepted, he is not accepted in the sense of stature and class, but it's not only accepted, but it's the right of the Republican to hold a slave. And you know, a lot of the misconception that was given to us coming up in these Americas in these times after 1933 and even into the 19th century was that the idea and the consciousness of color was what was construed or parallel with the idea of black and white. Okay, there's some Moors that will talk to you about the consciousness of the word black and the consciousness of the word white. The word black in etymological terms and etymology stemming from the word black or blek or bleak or blanc in French or blank, right? You have a situation where the blankness or the invisibility due to the overdominance of the shade is basically within balance to the blankness or the same invisibility that you see with the other side of the paradigm, which is sort of the positive and the negative, the black and the white, okay? If you see all white, if you see nothing but blinding lights in front of you, you can't see anything, okay? And if you see all black and the shade is completely triple stage, as you see in creation prior to the birth of the planets and what have you, you're in a situation where vision is impossible except through the pineal. That blindness and that invisibility to some natives and some elders amongst the Aboriginals here was not only essential, it was imperative that it be brought forth and used to train the seers, to train the shekels, to train the learned ones, the priests, if you will, of the different towns and the different nations. And amongst my nation specifically, with Jalagi people, with Cherokee people, the Mama are the ones known as the gifted ones, the ones with sight. And they are raised for 9 years in that blackness, in that darkness. And the point of that is their history, their tradition, as well as the understanding of how to deal with the realms beyond this third dimensional reality has to be understood completely from a mental place first. And once they get through that 9 years of training, the outside world becomes secondary. And unfortunately, we've been raised in a reality where we've been externalized prior to our experience within. So the consciousness that we return to through understanding chakra work, through understanding meditation, through understanding astrology, through understanding the sciences, is actually in reverse to the wisdom of the sages and the older ones. But black and white, if you will, the same blindness, different sides of the spectrum. Now, when you had a situation with the colonization that came about with the European nations, mainly Europe, in reference to England, especially not only just England, but Holland, if you will, the Netherlands, all of these places. They were the ones who construed the idea of white and black to be beyond caste and put it into a position of specifically shade of skin. And the purpose of that was to disconnect the patrilineage as well as the matrilineage of the brown man to these Americas. Because the slave experience that we know of and that we're conscious of with the exportation of the Moors coming off of the Western Horn over into the Americas was credited with the majority of the reason why there are brown people on this continent. The reason for that is because, as we know, all laws and treaties prior to the United States of America's birthing in the corporate fashion that we know are still binding. So the focus of chaining people to understand white and black in a different consciousness is to remove the people who have the right to claim right to hold those treaties right and to hold those treaties up. Do not understand that they have a connection with those peoples and those lineages to be able to check the system that has us in the situation that we're in now. It's a little bit of a tangent, but the point being is that these excursions over into these trades not only were happening in the 13th and 14th centuries, but they were also happening in way older times. A lot prior to the 1400s, there were excursions happening. The natural currents that run between these two land masses after they separated will automatically pull you, navigator or not, into Brazil, onto these coasts here. And eventually, you know, the excursions up into the Yucatan and all of these places are inevitable. It just happens.
These are natural currents that
Yes.
pull you there?
Natural currents. And what they'll try to tell you about the experience here with the so-called Indians is that the majority of them came down through the, what do you call it? The Bering Strait.
Bering Strait.
Right. And as we know, when those pilgrimages were made, and they did happen, there were not only, I don't want to say myopic, but the climate was so hostile, there was no actual possibility for them to be bringing along livestock that they could eat because there was no vegetation to feed these animals. They were feeding them ice. So when you think about the consciousness or the perspective of people traveling from Asia into the Americas and how long that would take in huge droves, you can sort of start to get the grip on the idea of how impossible it would be to bring that many number of peoples over during such a harsh condition. And as you go further into South America, as you go further towards Argentina, the cultures get older. So these migrations were so predominant or so fluent, it would be understood that the pyramids and the cultures here would be older. And the further south that they go, they would be younger, because the excursions would be further south with a new experience of new people, you know, braving and you know, I guess tilling the land and making some type of society for themselves, you know. All that to say, these voyages were happening way prior to the Columbus experience that they give you here in American history that we understand it as we come up through the public school system, right? And some of this is going to be a little redundant because I don't know exactly where everyone is. What I'm mostly prepared for is just introductory, you know what I'm saying, experience. So for the Moors here that understand, you know what I'm saying, please be patient with your little brother. All right, so here we go. Let's keep going through. What we have here is the Piri Reis map, okay? You can take a look at it. What they don't give you here is the entire map. There's a Moor that sits on this map that was accredited to its birthing. And the Piri Reis map was discovered in 1513, okay? Ivan Van Sertima goes into detail about this map and what its significance was in reference to peoples, you know, navigating and voyaging into not only the Straits of Gibraltar and the Mediterranean Sea, but also into the Americas through, you know, the Atlantic Ocean. This map is significant because there were documented evidence or documented records from the Moor that used this map and created it that explained one or two things. One, that he had gained a pool of maps from previous times to put this map together that dated all the way back to the days of Alexander the Great. And when you think about the traveling of the Straits of Gibraltar and you think about the traveling of the peoples to the Americas in those times, it not only contradicts the idea of these Portuguese and these Spaniards who claim to have laid some type of claim to voyage in 1492. It not only challenges that, it also gives you evidence that there were maps and voyages being made prior to this whole experience that we understand now through the Middle Ages. Back since the days of Alexander the Great, there were people making voyages to the Americas. It was known as the secret land, if you will. A lot of these stories that you see amongst Icelandic people, people from Finland, Poland, people from Iceland, Scotland. They talk a lot about these Loch Ness monsters. They talk a lot about these dragons and these sea demons that would, swallow you up if you went out to sea. And what that was for was because the Moors who were ruling those areas were trying to keep the people afraid of the sea. Because, as we know, the European man's experience in the Caucasus Mountains, the European man's experience, and when I say European man, I don't necessarily mean white man, okay? I don't necessarily mean black man. I'm talking about this consciousness that was created through this being that was expanded to give human consciousness and human experience another variety and another excursion, another experience. Talking about the white man technically, but it's not, you know what I'm saying? It's not, it gets tricky. But all that to say, they didn't want those people out in the seas. At the time, in the 1500s, when you talk about Timbuktu, when you talk about Jenny, when you talk about the places that the gold trade was predominant, there were huge efforts to protect those trades because the majority of their excursions were coming here, okay? In the language of the Jalagi people, in the language of the Cherokee Indians, the word for 100 is shkohi, and shkohi is a word that means 10, okay? But shkohi jichwa is the word that means 100, and the word jichwa actually translates to bird, okay? And the significance behind that is similar to what you see in pictograph or hieroglyph, the same way you see in Egypt, the same way you see in older cultures amongst the Anunnaki and different peoples who use symbols to get their point across and actually tally word into tally script and into phonetics, okay? That same Egyptian and that same pharaonic consciousness not only existed in Egypt, but it also existed here for quite some time. All that to say, Piri Reis made this map in 1513. And what was happening was, not only did he accredit Alexander the Great and explorers prior to him to a reference to make that map, he also accredited a voyage in the year 1314, if I'm not mistaken, from his elders who were ruling the lands that he was in on the continent, passing through Cairo on their voyage to make way to the leaders of Egypt at that time before they went over to the continent. So now you have an experience where there's written documentation on Moors that were making voyages over to the Americas as early as the 1300s, okay? If you follow a brother named Graham Hancock, he wrote this book called The Fingerprints of the Gods. Okay, I don't know if you've heard of this book, but the brother is deep with his understanding of the maps. He has documented evidence of maps that have the topography exposed at the poles, okay? Now, the reason that's important is because, as we know, the North and South Pole have been under huge, mild, thick layers of ice for the past 6,000 years. So if his maps are accredited and if his maps are valid, topography being exposed at the poles would be a significant reference to there possibly having being maps as old as the experience prior to that ice settling in on the poles, when there were still mountains and when there was still topography and ranges and trees and stuff, okay? So there's potential that these maps are over 6,000 years old. And that's a huge contradiction to what they give us to this whole reconstruction and this whole understanding of the European Enlightenment. And this voyage of this European in an effort to colonize and to dominate the globe as late as 1492. Okay, those voyages are not that young at all. And that's important because that experience from Africa to the Americas was well understood way before this slave experience that we understand now through American history became forefronted into our understanding of how we wound up on this continent. All right, so let's keep going. Here we have some more pictures of some more relics, okay? What you see here is a basalt head of one of the Moorish rulers that ruled in Olmec lands, okay? The Olmec peoples, just like the Toltec, the Aztec, the Inca, the Huichol, the Mexica, all of these people down in Peru and Belize and Guyana, and even further south into Central and South America, were the ones who came over from Ghana to have experience with the natives of those places, and they mixed, okay? From what I was taught from the elders I studied with and the Moors that were putting me on, the word Mexico itself comes from the concept of mixing, a mexum, okay? The land of the mixing, the places of this new experience that we now know as this brown experience, accredited to black people, Spanish people, all these different, you know, classifications and segregations of the same folk. This basalt stone is not only 9 feet tall, but it's also obviously, it might be a little difficult for some to see, but it obviously gives you an envisionment, or gives you a understanding of the phenotype of this man. His features are broad, his nose features are broad, his lips are also large, and the whole focus of that, obviously, the air, the climate, okay, the temperate climate, tropical conditions, a better passageway for oxygen, right? We know that. As the climate gets colder, the Nordic peoples and their noses become smaller because they have to take in less oxygen because it's a harsher climate. There's colder air that they can't process at 100 degrees, right? At the end of the day, these are pictures of relics that they found, not only, let's see, what did they give me? Okay. A little bit this way. All right. At the end of the day, not only, these basalt stones were 9 feet tall, and the beauty of the situation is that they did a archaeological, like not a dig, but they did a research to match the stone to any of the stones in the remaining area where the stones were found, or where the heads were found, and they could not find anything similar to it for thousands of miles in the area. So it was obvious that there had been a voyage from out of the further North Americas or from the continent, they're not completely sure, to raft these stones to the places where the pyramids were built to build them, in replica of the gods who built that civilization and built temple civilization in South America. Okay? Let's keep going. Again, you'll see a reflection here of another Olmec leader, and I believe this is a chief. I'm not sure exactly what his nation is, but obviously you can see the parallel. Okay? You can see the parallel, and that experience is predominant here. Okay? This is a pictograph, or, you know what I'm saying, like a hieroglyph that they found amongst the Mayan people. Okay? In pre-Columbian America, what you have here is one of the Moors that was obviously getting the word from one of his mans. They were cooking or something, and he's telling his peoples what needs to be done next or what have you. I'm not exactly sure what the message is in the pictograph, but regardless, it could just be a daily scene of some of the life amongst the nobles, right? Pre-Columbian America is the key in the focus of that flick, because it's an experience prior to this whole sailing of Columbus and sailing of these colonists who were coming to, you know, inflict the New World Order that established in the 16th century. That experience not only gives evidence to travel and gives evidence to the brown man and the African man being on this continent prior to those experiences, it also challenges their whole accreditation to certain cultures and certain peoples being the ones to spawn those voyages. It didn't happen like that. And I know I'm preaching to the converted, but I like to hear it myself. You know what I'm saying? Okay. This right here is Montezuma, okay? He was a Moor in Mexico. And for those of you that have been in the military, you know the song. It's from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, right? Now, the irony in that song is what they're talking about is the colonization and the American forces with a few allies actually stomping out the last Moorish rules. You know what I'm saying? The shores of Tripoli and Maghreb all the way to Mexico, basically taking down the nobles, because now we are in a situation where corporate consciousness and presidency, corporations are so far in control of what we do in reference to commerce and conducting ourselves as sovereigns that we are forced to interface with them in their courts. That's the dilemma, that's the predicament. Montezuma was one of the last of Mexico to rule the same way King Boabdil was one of the last in Seville, in Cordoba. Once Isabella and Ferdinand got enough rule, or got enough troops behind them, they seized control of that Moorish rule to put an end to it. And this was the establishment of this new world order, if you will, that was taking place in the 1500s. Okay? Hold on. Okay, what do we have? All right. We have an Aztec Indian chief, okay? And then also we have an African Zulu chief. Now, when you look at the headdress, most of the Aztec headdress that you see amongst the warriors has a lot of huge plume feathers. It's not just plume, but they're like, I forget the name of the bird. It's not really relevant, but you can see somewhat of a connection between the tassels here from the bustle, okay, on their headpieces coming down, somewhat probably significant to crescent moons. I'm not sure. I'm sure that the science, the same way it was amongst the Dogon, was amongst these people as well.
You mean the bird with the wings go down like that?
Well, not specifically my eye.
Quetzal bird.
Oh, right, the Quetzal bird, right. Definitely. Yeah, and that's, yeah, the Quetzal bird is relevant to those peoples the same way the macaw parrot is similar or relevant to the Arawaks. It's basically those are the parrots of those lands. And they're similar to what the Native American people here found a glory in through the eagle and through the hawk, right? It's just evidence of this experience and these connections that we're obviously aware of, but they've tried to erase from our experience on this continent. So now what we have here is obviously the Sphinx, okay? And the temples and the pyramids. I think this is Teotihuacan, if I'm not mistaken. Say again?
Pyramid of the Sun.
Okay, let's see. I don't even know how to pronounce that, to be honest, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe this is Peru. If I'm not mistaken, but obviously, the accreditation that they give to us, the accreditation that they give to us through the Egyptian understanding of pyramid culture, they try to date as early as 4000 BC. Okay, and the interesting thing about that is the pyramids of Giza were supposed to be specifically aligned to the belt of Orion. Okay, and the belt of Orion, the constellation itself, and the stars. And obviously, to some degree, they give us an idea or an understanding of these temples being somewhat used for like sarcophaguses or for a tomb. But in reality, from what I was taught, these temples were actually portholes for the Moors or the ancient ones to be able to travel the stars. And all that to say, the constellation's alignment with these pyramids in Giza could not only have them, it's impossible for them in the year 4000 BC to have been aligned up the way that the constellations move due to the Earth's shape. And they accredit that those linings and that parallel or that connection would have had to have been at least 6,000 years prior to that in order for them to actually have that alignment correct, okay? These pyramids here, the ones in South America, obviously happen to be bigger than the ones in Egypt. But regardless to what, you still see an accreditation to the sun calendars, okay? The Mayans were ruled by a Venusian calendar, the same way that the Cherokee and a few of the nations here were, okay? The Venusian calendar is on a 279-day cycle. It's not a 364 and a quarter day cycle, but that was the holy calendar to them. And each of the stairs was supposed to be representation of certain alignments of the sun shadow that would give them a snake-like pattern down the side of the pyramid during certain times of the year and certain equinoxes that would give them the connection to the flying serpent, or Quetzalcoatl, which was their understanding of the same Christ-like understanding that came through with Yahshua ben Yosef, whatever you call him or not. I don't want to get into the semantics or what have you, okay? But the parallels is the reference here. This is the point, okay? This Moorish experience or this Aboriginal experience here is a lot deeper than what we've been accredited as far as, or what we've been programmed with, really, with this experience of this white man and this black man and this colonization that has come about through an understanding of those, you know, those distinctions through skin and skin color. There were white men in the 1700s darker than everyone in this room. And there were black men in this country in the 1700s lighter than anything in this room, okay? And the whole point of it was caste, where you were in society, not exactly where your skin color was, okay? All right, so let's keep going, okay? Here we have, obviously, one of the teepees of the Sioux. The Sioux were obviously in the Western Plains. Those were Moors that were more out towards the Dakotas, and a little bit further south near Colorado, amongst the Navajo and the Shoshone and different people those ways. This is a thatched roof style housing that you see in the lands of Kenya. Okay, obviously not completely parallel, but the interesting thing is that this thatch style roofing, this wigwam style housing that they also accredit to Native Americans here amongst the eastern woodland peoples and certain peoples on the eastern plains or the eastern coast, was accredited through some of the historians in England to have also existed on the shores of Scotland in the 12th and the 11th century. There's a brother named David MacRitchie. For those of you that are familiar with him, he wrote a book called The Ancient and Modern Britons, okay? And David MacRitchie has 2 volumes of that book. And the second volume is a little difficult to find, but if you can, check it out. He talks about the wigwams that were given documentation and reference to in the 12th and the 11th centuries around the times of James I. And James I of Scotland came through with the Normans, okay? In English, basically they accredited to the Normans, but we all know in French the word noir is reference to black. Okay, these were the Danes, these were the Brutish. These were the Moors that basically helped him establish his dominion in those places, in that continent, that place that they call Scotland now. There were 7 provinces prior to the existence of the federal jurisdiction known of it now that had 4 of those provinces ruled by Danes, by Moors, by brown folk. And through the years and the bloodlines and the accumulation through the harems, which is what a lot of the Moors were accumulating throughout not only Spain, but the Pyrenees and France and all these different places, those bloodlines became bleached and they became lighter. So you have a situation where the concubines are having babies, and 4 generations down the line, all it takes is a few book writings to change the spellings of the names, not only the spelling of the names, but to change the experience of the genealogy. And little Joseph McCabe has no idea that his grandfather's name was Sultan Abdul Ali Allah. He has no connection to that because the books have been changed. And this is where you see a lot of the connections to some of the Moorish names being accredited to these families over in Europe. All right? Okay, let's keep going. This right here is what they call the flag of the Iroquois, okay? All of you are familiar with the cedar tree of Lebanon that you see on the Lebanese flag, okay? That cedar tree that you see there is what they credit to the continental flag, okay? The one that was established in 1777, right? Now, the tree that you see here is what they call the white tree of peace, okay? And this tree here was amongst the Haudenosaunee people, okay? The Haudenosaunee are specifically Iroquois, but those connections were a lot larger than what you understand as the Six Nation Confederacy, okay? Haudenosaunee to the Iroquois people is a word that means the people of the Longhouse. All Longhouse traditions up from Maine down to Florida were at one time in accumulation. They were at one time together, they were joined, okay? And around the time that this flag was established, what was happening was there was a newer continuum of this very confederacy that was given to these people to be established not only sovereignly but corporately as well. Because we all know that the annexation of the corporate United States was put together in an effort to help the little brothers understand corporate consciousness, or as close to sovereign and noble rule as they could, because they weren't nobles, they weren't sovereigns. So there was only a certain understanding of that type of life and nationality that they could fathom. So that was the focus that they were given. They were supposed to understand it corporately. And those 13 colonies that were set up were actually intended to be not only places for them to understand their, it was not only intended for them to be brought up into a different understanding of subjugation and serfdom, it was also intended to be a tax reserve, to give tribute not only to the king over in Europe, but also to the sultans and the hakims over in Morocco, because they were all accredited. When you talk about this empire, this Moorish empire, you have a situation where they, through the corporate understanding or presidencies that rose up, through the dictatorships that rose up over the ideas of republics, sectioned off a lot of the empire that used to be established in entirety at one time. And these people here, the Iroquois, were the ones who kept the same consciousness that you saw during the initial stages of places like the USSR, places like Turkey, and all of these different regions. These were the people holding down that consciousness here in the Americas, okay? It was accredited to the Mohawk, to the Senecas, the Cayugas, the Tuscaroras, as well as the Oneidas, the Onondagas. There were 6 nations that were put together to not only continue the law of peace, continue the law of Islam, but also to aid the peoples coming over to these colonies that they set aside for these people to live in and experience, as best an understanding of nationality as they could, and train them in how to deal with that to some degree. Obviously, it wasn't, you know, hand-in-hand work, but these were the people that gave them the experience. This is the first draft of the United States Constitution, right here, okay? And obviously, you're talking about the United States of America, this corporate body that we live in now, okay? It's important because obviously we're in that jurisdiction now, dealing with it. Well, we're not in it, but we're dealing with it to a large degree because of the hold that the corporate body has gotten a hold of. Okay, let's keep going. The Ben Ishmael tribe, okay? These peoples were ancient ones or aboriginals that were here since antiquity, from what I've been told. There are brothers out in Ohio that wrote a book, or they write a magazine called Ancient America. Okay, I don't know if anybody's seen this magazine, but they talk a lot about the ancient mound culture and the ancient ways of the observatories of the heavens, the ones who did astrology, the ones who monitored the heavens to know when to plant which crops and how to conduct business amongst the peoples, right? They were in Indiana, a little bit north of Illinois, all up in these regions here, okay? It's evidence to an experience of peoples not accredited to this so-called Indian experience, not accredited to places like Illinois where you will find Cherokee, where you will find Kiowas, where you will find Winnebagos and Ho-Chunks. You find a few nations. You also find Crees, you find Chickasaws, you find Comanches to some degree in parts of Indiana now. But they talk nothing about these L's. They talk nothing about these people because the understanding of the Indian is his bringing up of his experience into this world now from the old ones. And the old ones to him were considered enemies to some degree. Because what happened was the Moors kind of went crazy. They kind of went crazy, and this is what encouraged the rebellion that went about through the European nations. These aren't just evil people that decided to just start colonizing things and dominating things. We, the Moors, taught them how to do this. Okay, the British learned their things and learned their ways of being through the brutish. The brutish, the Moors, that was us. We showed them how to do that because we were running all up and down the shores of Scotland, running all up and down the shores of Finland, Poland, all these places, and snatching Europeans up and selling them into slavery in Africa prior to 1492. It's a documented fact that not only did the majority of Europeans as late as the 1800s not know how to read, a lot of them subscribed to Christianity the way they did because they wanted to see the power of the word invoked the way it was. They didn't have a proper understanding of literature and knowledge, so you can see the difficulty they would have with navigation, understanding longitude and latitude. It's just not feasible to the degree that they said it happened. This experience here of the older ones, the L's, the breaths of Allah, of God, the ones who knew the ways from antiquity and knew the ways as it was established prior to the life we have now, they give you a mapping of where these people were. Okay, when you talk about the place known as Alabama, right? From what I was taught, the Moors had taught me, Alabama was a bastardized word of the peoples who inhabited those lands of the descension from the old ones prior to the Indians, the Alabama. And these were similar to the Ben Ismail peoples. These were Moors pocketed in places around Alabama. You know what I'm saying? Who had an experience here and a rule here, a government here, in connection with the understanding that existed in the old republic, okay? Known here through the Haudenosaunee, known here through the Iroquois Confederacy. They only accredited 6 nations to that confederacy, but it was a lot larger. You know, I know specifically that this nation, the Cherokee Nation, broke away from that confederacy in the 12th century because they wanted to do their own thing. And a lot of Moors started to do that. And you still see it happening now. You got the Great Seal, you got the Aziza, you got all these different Moors, these different factions, these different places of study and group. And, you know, at the end of the day, that fortification or those stratifications, those little cubicles is what helps us to, or retards the growth and retards the expedition of our process coming together as a nation. They're not really going to respect us until we have 500 acres of land or more. And until we have a certain amount of revenue and the potential to exercise the right that you have once you are a sovereign community to build a military, to own planes, and to monitor the traffic and airspace over your so-called sovereignty. And it becomes difficult. There's a lot of things going on. I don't have to talk about the frustration. Anyway, let's keep going. All right. Now, the Ben Ishmael, the Alabama, all of these ancient ones, these Moors that existed prior to the arrival of the Scottish, the arrival of the Dutch, the arrival of the English, the arrival of all of these Portuguese and these Spaniards. The end of the day, their experience was cut short once the last Moorish threshold of importance was seized control of, and that was in Cordoba. 1492, you had experience where Isabella and Ferdinand seized control of the last Moorish rule that had a dominating force and effect in those regions of Europe, okay? That was what they called the Enlightenment period, right? This whole revolution of science, all these things. All that was going on was they were translating the books that came out of the custodians of the ancient Comedian ways, the ancient Egyptian ways. The custodians of the ancient Egyptian knowledge was passed on to the Arabs. And they were the ones who held that knowledge to pass it through from antiquity into the times that exist now. And as time went on, once those rulers throughout Northern Africa and Maghreb hit Spain, once they started to rule over in places like France and places like Spain and further south into Sicily and other places, you had an experience where they were now dealing with not only just Mohammedans, but they were also dealing with Europeans. They were dealing with Christians, white Christians. They were dealing with Moorish Christians. They were Moors who had harems but still praised Christ. They understood Islam for what it was, from the creed, beyond the religion. M-O-S-L-E-M, Muslim, not Muslim. The Muslim is the one who follows the faith. The Muslim is the one who follows the creed. Love, truth, peace, justice, and what?
Freedom.
Freedom, right? Those were the ones who followed the creed. So they didn't care. They're like, you call me Christian, you call me whatever you want to call me. I know the science, I know the definition, and I know the core essence of what it is that I'm supposed to be focused on. You can follow any religion you want, right? So once that experience was put to rest with this whole reconstruction that you see happening not only in the Americas, but it happened in Northern Africa as well. And this is the political lines that were drawn for places like Togo, for Benin, places like the Central Republic of Congo, places like Libya, places like Tripoli, places like all these countries. They were political designations given to these regions that were under different, geographic or demographical barriers. You had situations where there were countries split up, where entire tribes were set up in 2 different countries now. It's entire nations set up in 2 different political jurisdictions. And the same thing happened here in the Americas. From Peru to Belize to Mexico to Kentucky to Tennessee, all these places you had Aboriginals who were of the same nation, but now one lives in Georgia and the other one lives in Mississippi, right? Or that's not completely correct, but you get the idea of what I'm saying. Once that started to happen, the consciousness had to shift, because the right to do what these nations were doing was auspiced by the Pope. He was the only one that gave them right to go out and to kill in the name of God, to establish the rule that they were trying to establish, because those ones who were dealing with that understanding of religion at the time, from the Pope's perspective of things, were also dealing with Moorish science. But they were dealing with it in a different way, okay? When you had these crusades, this experience of these Christians going over to the motherland trying to pilgrim to see the Temple on the Mount, they were not allowed. Any white man during those times who wanted to go see the Holy Land without certain guidance or certain protection was snatched, sold into slavery. That's how it went. And this is where the Knights Templars, this is where the Knights of Malta, this is where the armies of God stood up to guide these people into the Holy Lands to be able to go pay pilgrimage to these places. And as a result, once those armies were established, you had a situation where that experience of these Europeans could now filter out a little bit better beyond Moorish rule. And once they got enough control, they had to not only establish their ability to freely roam and freely colonize and freely change the minds of the people, they also had to retrain the minds of the people so that they could never come back to establish the rule that they were now setting up corporately. And this is where the idea of the science, or the idea of the statement, after me there will be no more, right? You hear that all the time from rappers. I'm the best dude, after me there'll be no more. That's a Masonic term for the understanding of, after we establish this conglomerate, or after we establish this rule and this colonial understanding that we're trying to put on the planet, there will be no more Moors. No more. They will never regain consciousness to be able to rule in the sovereign right that they did and the capacity that they did. And
After me, there'll be no more.
after me, there'll be no more. After we establish ourselves, after we take the knowledge that was given to us in symbolic form through the degrees and use it in our own right to be able to establish ourselves and uplift ourselves, we will no longer build with the elders who taught it to us. We will now subjugate them. Why? Because they subjugated us. And once,
Yes. When you said after me, it'll be no more.
Right.
You said that it was a Masonic term. Like what source?
What's that?
You said that it was a Masonic term?
Right.
From what, like, degree, what source?
You have to, I'm trying to remember the brother's name on the book he wrote. It wasn't specifically on Freemasonry, but he wrote a few books on the ritual, if you will, just going through what you have to go through to get initiated. And but not specifically with just initiation. He was talking about the usage of the Scottish Rite and the usage of those who came through the European way of the understanding of Masonry. They only got a certain understanding of the ancient knowledge and the knowledge of I am through symbol.
So,
And
when you say after me, there'll be no more,
right,
I'm trying to find the connection. I mean, I understand what you're saying
right,
from a different level, but kind of like, what degree, where he get it from?
right.
Astor Corley.
What's that?
Wasn't it Astor Corley?
I don't think it was Carly. I don't remember offhand the brother's name, to be honest. I would have to go back into it. We just,
Think
built.
about it.
All that to say, regardless of the statement or regardless of the, consciousness behind that term, the plight for no mores to be in rule anymore was obviously the agenda of the European nations. And this is a depiction of what started to happen, okay? Those who would not convert to Christianity, those who would not convert to the understandings of the new European rule were slaughtered.
Right.
It's just the way it went. Your name is not Abdullah anymore, your name is now Albert. That's it. You're gonna wear these jeans, you're gonna wear these overalls, you're gonna farm. And that's the only way it's gonna go. You're not gonna be able to practice Islam in the way that you knew it. Because through our understanding of Christianity and through our training of what we are giving you as far as religion is concerned and the way of life that we're allowing you now, you are stepping down out of that sovereign right and that title of nobility, which is what the L's and Bays and Pashas and all of these different suffixes to the names are. They're different land titles. They're titles giving you noble claim to certain lands. Once you become subject to this understanding way of life, you are now subject to our jurisdiction and subject to our training of life. And that was the focus. And there were Moors all over the planet being killed. These are Arawak brothers and sisters going through it who just refused to submit. They refused to do it, you know. Let's keep on. Right? Similar situation here. From what I understand, this is what was happening in Spain. Okay? When you see movies like Jack Sparrow, right? All these pirates of the Caribbean, you always see this white man with these twirled up mustaches, okay? And this Moorish garb with the sashes, with the pant legs, right? And even the turbans, okay? These men were not white men. The pirates, if you will, were the Moors who were kicked out of Moorish Spain. Now that Isabella and Ferdinand have seized control. And they said, okay, cool, you're gonna kick us out of Spain, you're not gonna let us establish the rule that we had, so we'll take to the seas. Y'all have to use the seas to use your commerce. So since you shoot us out of the commerce, anyone coming through these seas without the proper fashion and without the proper right, that's it. We taking their stuff and we taking them and we selling them into slavery for money, and we acquiring more pirates to come with us. Anybody who was outcasted from the system that was being set up all over the world, they took to the seas.
That was the Barbary Coast?
Yeah, the Barbary Corsairs.
So in other words, that those pirates were Moors, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, they were.
Yes.
They were Moors.
Well, this man that they call Blackbeard the pirate, was he a Moor too?
Blackbeard, well, yeah.
Yeah, because they say his hair was totally black.
Yeah. I don't know if it's specifically accredited to his beard, because there's a few brothers. Redbeard, there was Bluebeard, there's a few of them. Regardless to what, these brothers were Moors. They were not only connected with the ones coming out of Spain, but mind you, that Moorish experience also started to pick up those who were outcasted from the European nations. So you had a situation where they would set up Christian Moors, the same way they did ones from Islam, and they would use them to go into certain towns. And they would show up in places like Seville, they would show up in places, well, not just for Seville, but further along the coast into Europe, and they would dock these ships into the ports and let these Christian, like, pirates get off the ships and roll into town, like everything's cool, we're just here to stock up on what have you. The ones ruling the town would say, okay, cool, and then the Moors would just jump out the ships and go up and run things, and they would flip and take control of, you know, anybody who wasn't trying to hear what they were trying to say, take whatever goods they needed to take, and they were also seizing control of captives to row their boats. It was the same situation going on all over the world. All that to say, that reconstruction was what we understand through this whole mythos that they give now to this new world order that's coming. Okay, they talk about, like, you know, the Mayan calendar ending in the year 2012 BC, and they talk about this new world order that's coming about, and you see these regimes of folk being established through what's happening as the United States government gets further and further into its, you know, exposure of its, you know, de facto status and what have you, right? That new world order was what was established with Reconstruction, with the birthing of places and the political, the geographic places that they established within Africa as well as in the continents. The whole focus of it was to re-establish the order through a corporate understanding, because corporate understanding, business, commerce, used to be governed by common law, maritime law, right? Now, well, it's still governed by maritime law, but the common law had prior jurisdiction over it. But once they could remove those nobles, once they could remove those shechems, once they could remove those hakims, those sultans, the people of birthright who were ruling the peoples, they could establish presidents. Presidents preside over corporations, not people. Nothing to do with people. It's all about business, right? So this is the experience that was happening to the Moors. Time and time again, they started becoming captives and taken and sold into slavery. Now, mind you, all of this time frame, you're talking in the 15th centuries and beyond, you have a situation where the Moors were also fighting amongst themselves, okay? Especially throughout the wars happening with Islam on the continent. There was pillage to spread the message of Muhammad. And the ones taken captive throughout those wars who didn't want to be put into the understandings of Islam that were being given were put into the Western Horn, and they were put into the slave quarters off of the islands and then sent this way because they didn't understand the new idea of slavery that was coming in the chattel form. to the degree that it was going to exist here in the Americas, right?
Excuse me, he has to go to the bathroom, so.
I'm sorry.
Can he handle it for you,
All right,
or
all
should we
right.
take a break?
Please,
No?
that's what I.
We don't want, all right.
Okay, so the conquistadors, the black Arawaks, right? The experience happening there was similar not only in Jamaica and Haiti and the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico and all of these places. This same similar experience was happening amongst the Mayans, amongst the Aztecs, amongst the peoples all over Peru and Colombia, Venezuela, all of these places. Okay, it was a takeover. They were trying to establish the rule that they've gotten hold of now with this body politic that's come about through business. Okay, international, what? Through the United Nations, right? In replacement of the family of nations, the actual true sovereign people, right? Okay. All right. These are a picture of the ancient Mohawks. Okay. When you see Mohawk people now, up in Oneida country, up further near Maine, near New Brunswick, and even further up into Canada, they, you know, a lot more fair-skinned like myself and lighter, with the, you know, typical straight hair, and a lot of them have been infused with a lot of European blood. You know what I'm saying? With white blood, if you will, right? But these are the Mohawks of old. These were the ones that were around in 1754 with the, you know, birthing of this corporate understanding of the United States of America. These were the ones that sat Ben Franklin and all of these dudes down. These are the ones that were building with people like John Hanson, building with people like, you know, the Moors of the ancient ones, the ones that were running things before the Articles of Confederation were put to cease and weren't used anymore now that the Constitution was established. Okay, so it's just visuals for what we already know. We can keep going.
Taste the film.
Okay. These are some Seminoles. Okay. Egyptians. You know, the Seminoles were a word for runaway, and what it is in reference to is the Creeks, the Creek Indians that were going through the French and Indian Wars in the 1800s, and as well as the Cherokee and a few other nations like the Calusas and the Cayugas who were under pretty much hell because they recognized there was gold in those mountains, right? A lot of those wars that were going on amongst the, you know, the Jackson regime and even people prior to Andrew Jackson, and the French and Indian Wars going on a little bit earlier than that, they ran south into Florida amongst the Calusas and a few of the other of the natives down there because the swampland was difficult to maneuver through, right? They also incorporated a lot of people that had broken out of chattel slavery that happened to be Moors. Not all of them were so-called Africans from the continent, okay? The idea of these Africans coming over from the continent to be enslaved here was the, I don't want to say trickery, it was the strategy of the colonists, because what was happening was they were bringing people of different languages that didn't speak the same tongue and couldn't organize through a body politic to be able to rise up against what was happening, because not all of the Moors on the continent knew the ways, not all of them knew the functions of the Republic. So they were bringing Moors who didn't have that consciousness and were living a little bit wilder, just like the Shoshone and the Arapaho and all of these Moors out in the plains were living. And they brought them here to mix them up in confusion amongst the languages so that they could outnumber the Moors here that knew how to run the government, that knew how to deal with picking a president, that could deal with freehold consciousness. Okay? And these are pictures of some of those folks, you know. Keep going. Right? The continental flag, okay? Obviously, I don't want to be redundant. I'm sure people understand what's happening with the cedar tree of Lebanon. But I will say that this flag, from what I was taught by Elder Moors, did fly, from what I understand, in Massachusetts, the same way it flies in Lebanon now, okay? That cedar tree somewhat relevant or somewhat connected or parallel to what you see with the white tree of peace and the law of peace